Welcome back to G Fun Facts Online. Today, we are stripping away the myths of cinema and literature to dig into the mud of history. We are going to a specific location, roughly 90 kilometers south of modern-day Baghdad, into the flat, sun-baked plains of Mesopotamia. If you were to stand there today, you would see a waterlogged depression in the earth, a muddy square choked with reeds, surrounded by the broken debris of millennia. To the untrained eye, it looks like a swamp. But to the historian, this square is the ground zero of human ambition. This is the footprint of the Etemenanki, the temple of the foundation of heaven and earth. You might know it better by its other name, the Tower of Babel. For centuries, this tower was a creature of myth, existing only in the indignant verses of Genesis or the fantastical accounts of the Greek historian Herodotus, who described a wedding cake structure spiraled by a ramp. But in the last century, and particularly in light of discoveries made as recently as 2026, the tower has moved from myth to tangible engineering reality. We are going to look at how this structure was built, why it was built, and the specific man who raised its head to the heavens. And we are going to do this by listening to the voices of the builders themselves. Buried deep within the mud brick foundations of the great Mesopotamian cities were the time capsules of the ancient world. These are called foundation cylinders. Unlike Egyptian pharaohs, who carved their boasts onto towering stone obelisks for the living to see, Babylonian kings were obsessed with the audience below the earth, the netherworld deities, and the audience of the future, kings who would one day dig up their ruins. These cylinders are barrel-shaped clay artifacts, inscribed with tiny, intricate wedges of cuneiform script. They were never meant for our eyes. They were messages from a king to a god, buried in the dark to certify that a ruler had performed his sacred duty. The most significant of these belong to Nebuchadnezzar II, the Neo-Babylonian king, who reigned from 605 to 562 BCE. Through these texts, we can reconstruct the story of the Great Ziggurat not as a fable of divine punishment, but as a triumph of logistics and engineering. Nebuchadnezzar is often villainized in Judeo-Christian tradition as the destroyer of Jerusalem, but in his own words, he is a pious architect. Listen to how he describes the project on a cylinder found in the ruins of Babylon, now held in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. He says, "Etemenanki, the Ziggurat of Babylon, of which Nabopolassar, the king of Babylon my father, had fixed the foundation, but had not raised its top to the heavens. I set my hand to build it. I made it the wonder of the people of the world. I raised its top to heaven, made doors for the gates, and I covered it with bitumen and bricks." This is not the lament of a confused builder. It is the project report of a successful one. The inscriptions reveal that Nebuchadnezzar was actually a restorer. The tower was ancient even in his time, a holy relic that had been destroyed by the Assyrian king Sennacherib in 689 BCE. Sennacherib had not just knocked it down, he had dumped the debris into the canals to erase it from the earth. Nebuchadnezzar's father had begun the work, clearing the debris and laying a new foundation, but he died before the tower could be finished. Nebuchadnezzar resolved to finish it. We even have a picture of this moment. A spectacular artifact known as the Tower of Babel Stele from the Skoyan collection gives us the only known contemporary depiction of the tower. On this black stone monument, we see Nebuchadnezzar standing tall, wearing a conical royal hat, holding a staff and plans. Facing him is the Great Ziggurat. It is not a spiral minaret. It is a stark, stepped pyramid with 7 distinct stages, culminating in a high temple at the summit. The inscription on this stele is thrilling because it inadvertently supports the biblical narrative of the confusion of tongues. Nebuchadnezzar boasts, "I mobilized all countries everywhere, each and every ruler who had been raised to prominence over all the people of the world. The base I filled in to make a high terrace. I built their structures with bitumen and baked brick throughout." This confirms that Babylon was a metropolis of deportees. Jews, Assyrians, Syrians, Elamites, and Egyptians were all present, many as forced laborers. A construction site of this magnitude would indeed have been a cacophony of different languages: Aramaic, Akkadian, Hebrew, Egyptian. The Babel legend is likely a poetic memory of this very real sociological reality. Now let's look at the engineering, because this was a massive technological undertaking. Using the cylinders and the famous Esagila tablet, which is a dimension text, we know the base was a perfect square, measuring roughly 91 meters, or 300 feet on each side. The height was equal to the width, another 91 meters. That is the height of a 30-story modern building. In a world of single-story mud huts, this was an unimaginable skyscraper. The core of the ziggurat was made of sun-dried mud brick. This was the traditional material of Mesopotamia, but it had a fatal flaw: it dissolved in rain. A ziggurat with an exposed mud core would eventually melt into a shapeless mound, which is exactly what the site looks like today. Nebuchadnezzar's great innovation was the baked brick mantle. He encased the soft mud core in a shell of kiln-fired bricks, which were as hard as stone and impervious to water. But he didn't just stack them. He bonded them with bitumen, natural asphalt that bubbles up from the ground in a rock. This bitumen mortar was waterproof and flexible, allowing the massive structure to settle without cracking. The Bible remembers this engineering detail with surprising accuracy in Genesis chapter 11 verse 3, stating, "And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar." That slime was the bitumen. The tower rose in 7 stages. The first was a massive block 33 meters high. Above that were 5 smaller platforms, like stairs. The 7th and final stage was the Sahuru, the High Temple. The cylinders described this summit in lavish terms. It was plated with blue-glazed bricks, meant to blend with the sky, making the tower appear to connect physically with the heavens. The roof beams were cedar from Lebanon, covered in gold and silver. This was not a tomb, like a pyramid. It was a machine. It was a stairway to heaven designed for the god Marduk to come down to his bedchamber. To understand the scale of this, we have to look at the city around it. The restored Ziggurat was the anchor of a vast urban plan. If you visited Babylon in 570 BCE, you would pass through the Ishtar Gate, a towering facade of blue-glazed bricks adorned with golden dragons and bulls. You would walk down the processional way, a paved avenue flanked by walls decorated with 120 lions. This road ran parallel to the massive enclosure of the Etemenanki. The Ziggurat sat inside a vast courtyard paired with the Esagila, the ground-level temple. One was for the people, the other for the god. The cylinders also reveal that Nebuchadnezzar was a micromanager. He claims, "I fashioned mattocks, spades, and brick molds from ivory, ebony, and musukanu wood, and set them in the hands of a vast workforce. I myself carried the basket on my head." This image of the king carrying a basket of wet clay is a ceremonial trope, but it underscores that he saw himself as the servant of the gods. Recent discoveries in early 2026 at the city of Kish, a sister city to Babylon, have brought this into even sharper focus. Archaeologists translated new foundation cylinders describing Nebuchadnezzar's restoration of the Ziggurat of Kish. The language is nearly identical to the Babylon texts, confirming that this was a systematic, empire-wide policy. He was trying to reset the clock of Mesopotamian history. But the tragedy of the Etemenanki is how short-lived it was. Nebuchadnezzar finished his work around 570 BCE. Babylon fell to the Persians in 539 BCE, less than 40 years later. Initially, the tower was respected, but over centuries of rebellion and neglect, it began to crumble. The death blow came from a failed rescue attempt. When Alexander the Great conquered Babylon in 331 BCE, he wanted to restore the tower, but his engineers realized the debris was too vast to patch. They decided to dismantle it completely, to build it anew. Alexander conscripted 10,000 men to tear the Ziggurat down to its foundations. They succeeded in the demolition, but Alexander died in 323 BCE before the reconstruction could begin. The project was abandoned, leaving a flat, leveled foundation, a void in the landscape. For 2 millennia, the location was lost, until German archaeologist Robert Koldewey rediscovered the wet pit and the square footprint in 1913. Today, the high water table makes excavation difficult, but thanks to the cylinders, we don't need to dig up the tower to see it. We can build it in our minds. The irony is that the Bible was right, but for the wrong reasons. The builders did make a name for themselves that has lasted forever. Nebuchadnezzar failed to build a tower of stone that would last eternity, but by writing his story in clay, he built a memory that the waters of the Euphrates could never wash away. That is the story of the Etemenanki. Thank you for listening to G Fun Facts Online.